Welcome to Plants in Paradise, a weekly show sponsored by the City of Key West to help you keep your plants and garden growing. Now, here's your host, Landscape Coordinator for the City of Key West, Kathy Wolf.
Welcome to Plants in Paradise, a show which will explore some of the different perspectives and aspects of our tropical environment here in the Florida Keys, and taking a look at some of the different tropical plants as well. Today I want to talk about botany for horticulturists and gardeners. And I know that there are people that spend hours and hours and maybe even years and years learning about plants, how they operate, how they function. And I've found that by knowing a little bit about how a plant works can help you to grow a better garden and to take better care of your plants. My model today is a strangler fig, and before I get into this, I want to warn you all that never plant a fig tree in your yard unless you have plenty of room. They, well, as you can see, they start out small just like anything else, but before much time goes by, you'd have a huge tree. The strangler figs, if you have the room for them, are very good for birds. They enjoy the fruit, and it's a good way to bring in some of the different types of birds that are found in the Keys. But let's start with the very bottom, the very basics, and that is the roots of the plant. I've got a diagram that shows how a tree and how a plant grows. If you notice, the crown of the tree takes up a large area. The root base takes up just as much area. And people have done studies with plants and trees and have found that there is as much weight, as much part of the tree below the ground as there is above ground. So we find that the roots then anchor the plant, and they also serve to take in nutrients and water to feed the upper crown and the larger portion of the tree. Well, how does that help you to take better care of your plants and to have a better garden? Well, first of all, we'll go back to the drawing, the diagram. Say you have a friend who has, say a small mahogany tree in their yard that they would like to remove and have asked you to take it. You want to put it in your yard. So you go over and start to dig up the plant. Well, as you remove the plant, there's probably no way that you can get all of the roots. And you may wind up taking possibly a third to a half of that root system. Well, since the crown and the root system are balanced, if you eliminate any part of those roots, you have to do the same with the top of the tree. So whenever you're transplanting, you want to be sure to remove, by pruning, about a third to two-thirds of the crown. Cut out those leaves. I know it hurts, and it's painful to take a beautiful plant and cut it back when you're putting it in your home. But granted, I guarantee you it will be much healthier for the plant, and it will recover much more quickly and look beautiful in your own place. Another thing to remember, or that ties in with the root system and the balance with the crown, say you've taken a cutting of a plant, and this example is a buttonwood. You want to remove the lower leaves, the portion that will go into the soil or into the perlite. Now say you're going to put this cutting in about that deep in the soil. Well, many people stop at this point and leave all the foliage on the cutting. Again, you've cut this plant or this branch off of the main plant, and there aren't as many roots and plant system to take in water and nutrients to feed this upper portion. So again, cut it back. It may look ugly at first, but it's much less shock to the plant, and it'll help it to be healthier and happier in a quicker amount of time. It looks nude compared to what we started with, but this is the way to do cuttings. Leave a little bit of foliage so that the plant can still photosynthesize using the sun's light, but you want to reduce the amount of leaves that are on the cutting so that it does not lose too much water and shock then the whole system and the whole cutting. Okay, let's go on to the next part of the ficus tree here, the stem, or the trunk in this case. Got another drawing. If you take a trunk of a tree and cut it in cross-section, I've got a drawing of what that looks like. Now in this cross-section, there are three important parts of the plant. There's the outside bark, which protects the tree, protects the inner functioning portions of the trunk. This inside brown line is a layer called the cambium, and this is the layer that produces new wood and keeps the trunk healthy, keeps the trunk growing from year to year. On the outside of this cambium is a layer called the phloem. The phloem is the material that transports sugars and starches all through the plant and helps keep it healthy and provides materials for the cells of the plant to feed on. To the interior of the cambium is the xylem, and this is the material that takes the sugar and then, takes the water and the nutrients that are absorbed by the roots and passes them all up and down the trunk and through the tree and circulates them around to all the leaves and other parts of the tree. Let me take a closer look. Down here, I've cut a section out of this main trunk. I want to show a little bit of the detail of the xylem. As I said, the xylem is the material that transports water and nutrients through the tree. And looking at it like this, imagine a series of straws that run up and down the entire length of the tree in which water is transported. Now, up north, those of you that come from other parts of the country, you are familiar with trees. You cut them off, count the rings, and you can tell how old the tree is. Now, the reason that those rings are visible is the xylem. A new layer of xylem is made by the cambium each year. And then in the springtime, when there's a lot of water available, those straws, those vessels that conduct the water, are very large. And as the season goes on and it dries up a bit, they become smaller and smaller, and eventually becoming very compacted and making the ring appearance that you see when you cut or slice a tree and count the rings. Now the keys, being a tropical or semi-tropical environment, most of the trees that grow around us don't have these annual rings. If you cut open a tree and count the rings, it's very difficult to tell how old a tree is. For example, some trees, such as the ficus, the fig trees, or the red mangrove, have no rings at all. The material that is made by the cambium is laid out in layers, but it is not in true rings, like a lot of the northern trees that some of you are familiar with. There are other trees that have rings, but because of our good growing conditions year-round, they have more than one, like the black mangrove is one example. It may have up to 5 annual rings per year, 5 new layers of xylem each year. The cambium also produces the phloem to the outside towards the bark of the tree. And that, again, is the material that transports sugars and food all through the tree so that the cells are able to function. Those are a few ideas and a few concepts of the anatomy of a trunk, anatomy of a tree. But again, how can this help you to grow a better garden and to take care of your plants? Well, these 2 layers, the xylem and the phloem, are very important to the functioning of the tree. And if they are destroyed in any way, you will have a less healthy plant, and you can possibly kill the plant. Some examples of ways that those 2 layers may be destroyed. One culprit, big culprit, is the product that's sold called a weed eater or weed whacker. It's a monofilament line, a fishing line spinning around, very high speeds, and people use them to trim grasses and do edging work in their yards. Well, the problem with that machine is it is so strong and is moving so fast that if you're not careful and if you go too close to your plant trunk, especially a young tree, say like the strangler fig, you can quickly destroy those important layers that are on the outside of the trunk, reducing the amount of materials that are transported up and down through the plant and possibly killing it. Another situation that comes up is occasionally people girdle trees, either through accident, purposely, whatever. A good example of that is, say, if you're having some clearing work done on a lot and the person with the bulldozer is not overly careful and they happen to graze the side of the tree. They take out large chunks all around the circumference of the trunk. There again, you're cutting out those important tissues, those necessary tissues, and the plant will not have very good chance to succeed. Moving right along, there are the leaves, very, very important portion of the plant. These leaves take sunlight, take water, and take carbon dioxide, and through a process that goes on inside each individual cell, those materials are converted to sugars and to oxygen, which is released from the plant. The sugars are stored or are used as necessary, and they pass from the leaves to other parts of the plant through the phloem system. So again, the importance there of keeping that tissue alive and keeping it healthy. On the undersurface of the leaves, we can't see them with our bare eye, but if we could magnify this leaf, say 10, 20 times, we would find that there are little pores, little pockets on the bottom of that leaf. And I've got a picture that shows that in a little better detail. If you were able to look at the bottom of a leaf, you would find large block-like cells, and scattered through them are these ring-shaped pores. These are called stomates or stomata, and the two cells that are lining this pore are known as guard cells. They are very important because they regulate the amount of water that is lost by the plant. If there is quite a bit of water around, like we've had lately with the heavy rains, these cells are very thin and the pore tends to be wide open. Now, say during a normal winter season, when there's not much rain and the water supply is down, these cells then control and keep the water inside the plant. And they do that by expanding and becoming very large, leaving a small slit only in the center of that pore and controlling the amount of water that goes out. How does this apply to your plants? Again, the bottom sides of the leaves are usually where the stomates are. And it's very important to keep those open, to allow those pores to breathe as needed. Plants do take in some water through the roots. They also take in some through these stomata. Now, there are products on the market that are sold, and the purpose of them is to make the leaves shinier. It's kind of a plant polish. When using those, be very careful not to put the polish on the bottom of the leaf, because the pores can become blocked and reduce the health and the breathing of your plant. There's a disease that is fairly common this time of the year known as sooty mold. You may have seen it around town or around the Keys. Some trees are completely covered with it, a black coating that covers both the bottom and the top of the leaf. Well, the sooty mold is not a disease that is actually harming the plant, say by destroying tissues or anything. It's a mold that comes when other insects like aphids or mealybugs are chewing on the plant, they usually leave behind a kind of a nectar. The sooty mold spores come in, grow in that, and can eventually completely cover a plant. Well, back again to those pores, the stomates. If the sooty mold is allowed to become very, very thick and heavy on a plant, again, those pores are covered up, and the breathing ability of the plant is reduced. Another thing is if the top of the leaf is covered with sooty mold, it reduces the amount of sunlight that can come in, and the plant cannot photosynthesize, it cannot produce enough sugars to keep itself alive. Well, I've talked about the roots, stems, leaves of a plant, and I think it's time for a break. I'll be back in a few minutes with Plants in Paradise to talk about some of the other portions of the plant, the flowers and the fruit that require a little care and a little time to bring about. Come back in a few minutes with Plants in Paradise. I've been talking about anatomy of plants, how they work, how they function, the different parts of them, in hopes that with this understanding you can grow your own plants a little, or keep your plants a little more healthy and possibly have a better garden. I've talked about the roots, stem, leaves, and now I'd like to get into the flowers and the fruit of plants. Got a great model of a plant here, courtesy of the Florida Keys Community College. And I think you can see clearly the different parts of the plant. First of all, this large center portion is the female part of the plant, made up of the ovary, pistil, stigma. The male part of the plant, the anthers, are the areas, these large areas on the end are where the pollen is produced. And then there are some protective and covering parts of the flower. These outside portions are known as sepals, and of course the petals, which are quite colorful on many of the flowers and plants found in the Keys. Well, basically how this works, probably most of you are familiar with it, but just as a review, the anthers produce pollen, and this may be carried around by an insect, or it may blow through the wind, whatever. And eventually it lands up here on the stigma, on the female portion of the plant. Now this pollen starts a process and creates a long tube, and it travels the length of this part and goes down into the ovary. In this area, fertilization takes place and a seed is produced. Now plants that have fruit, say like apples or sapodillas or anything like that have a seed in the center, the fruit is actually a thickening of this part of the plant. All the rest of this material drops off, is lost along the way, and the fruit then continues to thicken and eventually can provide food for that growing seed. Now, not all plants have both sets, male and female parts, in their flowers. An example of that is the sea grape, the papaya. Each of those plants have separate sexed plants. And I've had people talk to me about a papaya plant that they've had for years and have never had any fruit on it. Well, that's the reason. They had a plant that has only male flowers. In other words, this whole central portion is missing from the plant. And you have to plant another one nearby that turns out female in order to get fruit. Now from this flower, eventually the fruit is produced. Again, the thickening of the ovary area around the seed. Got a tomato here, and every once in a while in trivia contests, question comes up, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Well, botanically speaking, it is a fruit because it is this portion here. If you open it up, you find seeds, the old ovary sections, and the red part, the flesh, the skin, is all a portion of this ovary that has thickened over time. Well, you may be asking, what's the difference? What does it matter whether I know if this is a fruit or a vegetable? Again, fruits are the result of a flower and the reproduction process. Vegetables, on the other hand, are usually other parts of the plant, like a leafy part. Say, spinach is a good example. The leaves, the greens, are the portion that we eat. Well, I'd like to show you how, in understanding what part of these plants the vegetables and fruits are, it can help you to grow them better. Say if you have a vegetable garden, or say if you want to encourage flowering in your plants. Fertilizer can help that. And I've got another diagram here. I'll talk a little bit about fertilizers, formulas, and what is best for leafy plants and what is best for plants where you would like to have flowers or fruit. Let's see, first of all, general formula. Whenever you buy a bag of fertilizer, you will find 3 numbers on the front. And just as an example, I've chosen 666 here. The first number tells you how much nitrogen is in the formula. And usually these numbers refer to percentage weight of the compound in the full bag. Say if you buy a bag of 100 pounds of fertilizer, it has this formula, 666. That means you have 6 pounds of nitrogen, 6 pounds of phosphorus, and 6 pounds of potassium in that bag. Okay, let's go back to nitrogen. Nitrogen is good for foliage. It encourages green growth, it encourages leaf growth, and it is needed for good color in your plants. Sometimes of the year when we get a lot of rain, you'll notice that some of the plants, the new growth comes out yellowish in color. The reason for that is a great deal of nitrogen has been washed out of the soil, and it needs a bit of supplement. A little fertilizer will green it right back up again. The second number is phosphorus. Phosphorus is good for flowers, for fruits, and it is needed for the plant to grow well. Finally, that last number, potassium, is needed for root growth, and it acts as kind of a balancing component between the first two, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. Now, let's get back to your garden. Say you're growing a shade tree. You don't care too much about how many flowers or fruit it has. Say like a mahogany. You don't care if there are a lot of flowers on it or seeds. What you would want to do is fertilize with a formula that is very heavy in nitrogen. That will give you lots of green growth, give you lots of leaves, and tend to cut back a little bit on the flowers. On the other hand, say if you have a garden, you're growing tomatoes, you're growing, what's another example? Say green peppers. These are fruits. They are parts of the plant produced by the flower, and consequently you need more of the potassium and the phosphorus to get good growth of those parts of the plant. An example I selected here was 359. Again, those last 2 numbers are larger, heavier in the fruit and flower growing department. In addition to those major 3, the big 3 are important, but here in the Keys, our soils are so poor, there are other elements that are needed by the plants, and they're needed in very, very small amounts. But because they're not available in the soil, you want to be sure to fertilize with these occasionally. I'll go through the whole list: sulfur, calcium, iron, magnesium, manganese, copper, zinc, boron, molybdenum, and chlorine. It's not important to remember these, but remember that they are minor elements, and there are minor element fertilizers. Occasionally, a little shot of this on your plants, on your garden, will help a great deal. Well, let's get back to that tomato. Say you have a vegetable garden. say this summer you decide to grow some cherry tomatoes, green peppers, eggplants. What you want to do to encourage flowering, first of all, plenty of flowers, lots of flowers, healthy flowers, and second, to encourage large, ripe, very nice-looking tomatoes, is to use and remember that fertilizer formula. Be sure to buy a product that has a lot of the potassium and phosphorus in it. And some examples are Osmocote is a time-release fertilizer that is heavy in the last two numbers. And Peters is a water-soluble type of fertilizer that can be added to the plants every time you water. It's another important thing to remember about fertilizers. No matter what type you use, the plants prefer to have a constant source of food rather than an occasional heavy application. So again, using a time release or maybe a water-soluble, a water-dissolving type of fertilizer will give you constant and ongoing good health in your plants rather than a sporadic type of growth. So I've talked about roots, stem, leaves, flowers, and fruits, the major parts, the major portions of the plant. And this has been very quick talk about, again, things that some people spend years and years studying and gaining information on. If you would like more information on this type of thing and finding out more about the parts of your plants, the Monroe County Extension Office is a good source. All aspects of plants and gardening. They're located on Stock Island and in the county office building. So, I want to thank you for tuning in tonight to Plants in Paradise, and I hope that the information that I've given you tonight will help your plants to grow better and grow green. Thanks for tuning in.
Plants in Paradise is sponsored by the City of Key West. Gardening product brand names are used for informational purposes only. Such mention does not constitute an endorsement of a product over others that may do the same job while used in a similar manner. Questions or comments on today's show can be sent to this station, Telecommunications Incorporated, 1700 North Roosevelt Boulevard, Key West, Florida, 33040.